5 SEC games headline an electric slate of games on Tuesday, including Auburn hosting Mississippi State without Johni Broome. Could an upset be brewing?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Tuesday and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host for today, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. I want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel, and remind all of you that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, Tuesday, fantastic slate of games all across college basketball in every major conference. We're going to discuss the key matchups in each of those conferences. We're also going to share some thoughts on Rick Barnes' comments about Chaz Lanier from over the weekend, as well as a note about the two Michigan schools, Michigan and Michigan State, which are both 5-0 to start conference play in the Big Ten. We're starting with the SEC. We're going to preview the 5 SEC games taking place this weekend, including Auburn hosting Mississippi State without Johni Broome. But I do want to start the show with something that Isaac and I were not able to get to on Monday's show, and that Isaac and Leaf didn't get to because it hadn't come out yet when they did Saturday's game night episode. If you haven't seen the game night shows, by the way, they're brand new. Second week last week. Leaf Tulane, our regular guest on Wednesday's shows, he is hosting a Saturday night live show after all the games are done. Fantastic way to get a quick primer on how all the games went on Saturdays. Regardless, we weren't able to get to this on Monday's show, so I want to talk about it here. Rick Barnes had a quote after Tennessee's game over the weekend talking about Chaz Lanier and benching him in the second half. I'm not going to read the entire quote, but I'm going to read a couple lines from it and talk about the significance of what he said specifically. Here's the quote. He says, quote, "I took him out of the first play of the second half because he didn't shoot the ball. That play was designed for that shot. And I told him, I said, if you're not going to do what you're getting paid to do, you sit over here, because he is getting paid to do that." So couple things on this quote. For starters, benching a player for not running a play correctly or for making a mistake or for a variety of reasons, not unusual. Not unusual for Coach Barnes, not unusual for most college basketball coaches. Jim Calhoun was very famous at UConn for calling a timeout and spending the entire timeout just staring at one of his players if he was upset with them. I'm not sure there's a coach in college basketball that hasn't used a frustration timeout specifically to bench a player for a variety of reasons. Calling out a player in a post-game press conference to the media is also not particularly unusual. It is a little bit less common now than it used to be. I think there's probably some commentary on the state of just the difference in generations across college basketball and across sports in general. Again, good coaches, and Rick Barnes is a good coach, know which players you can call out publicly in this kind of situation versus which players maybe you wouldn't take this approach. Some players are going to handle something like this very negatively and could either cause morale issues on the team or will just shut down and not play well. Some players, this is going to motivate them and fire them up. I'm guessing Barnes is smart enough to know that Chaz Lanier will respond positively to this. We will see how the next couple of games go for Tennessee, but calling out a player in this manner isn't particularly noteworthy or unusual either. The part of this that is unusual, and only unusual because of the modern era of college basketball that we are in, is that he correctly identified that Chaz Lanier is being paid to shoot the basketball. And again, that's not a secret. Tennessee paid Dalton Knecht a lot of money last year specifically to score. They had a team built around defense. They had a team that had good offensive players, but not a go-to scoring option. They went out, got the best go-to scoring option they could possibly get in the transfer portal. He turned out better than anybody could have expected, was an All-American first-round pick. And then Chaz Lanier was brought in specifically to replace Dalton Knecht. So everybody knew that he was being asked to fill the same role, a role that he has filled admirably up to this point this season. He has been very, very good. He has been efficient. He has been scoring 20 points per game. He has been great in that role for Tennessee this year. But it is very clear that Chaz Lanier is being paid money by Tennessee or by the NIL collective, as we still transition into schools directly paying players, he is being paid to score for Tennessee. So it's not that it is unknown. It is not that it is a secret, but it is still unusual in this new era of college basketball to hear a coach speaking like you would hear a professional coach speak about a professional athlete. He is paid. We're paying him to do this. In the past, you wouldn't say that. Maybe you would still be paying them under the table. I'm not saying anything about Barnes specifically, but let's be honest. Student athletes have been paid long before it became allowed through NIL rules. But you wouldn't say this. Now you're saying it. And I think that's the interesting part about this. That's the part of this that is unique. And what it is, it's a change in how student athletes are perceived by the public. And it is a part of the new kind of era for these student athletes, the good with the bad. We on this podcast, myself and Isaac and Leaf, have had a positive belief that student athletes should have more player autonomy, that they should be able to get paid for their services, that there should be the ability to look at new schools and look at new opportunities. I think the overall lack of rules in college basketball is a problem in college sports in general. And I think the fact that there's less rules around college athletics than there are in professional sports with regards to roster movement is clearly a problem. But the overall idea that student athletes can make money off their name, image, likeness, and can make money playing college basketball is not a bad thing. But with the ability to, put your services out to the highest bidder and go play basketball and make millions of dollars doing it, there's going to be some other sides to that. And one of them is the expectations are higher. The pressure on you to perform is higher. The coaches calling you out in media, that is something that is going to happen now, and frankly is more acceptable. I don't know that it was ever unacceptable, but certainly I think at this point, if Rick Barnes calling out a player directly for saying you are paid to do this, you need to do it, that doesn't rub you the wrong way like it used to, because it's true. We all know it's true. It's not a big secret. It's a fact. He's getting paid. I don't know how much money he's getting paid, but a lot of money to shoot the basketball. Now, we can't expect 19 to 22-year-olds or 23-year-olds to not make mistakes. And I don't think Rick Barnes has the belief that Chaz Lanier needs to be perfect. That would be ridiculous. But you have to adhere to what you're asked to do. And now that you're getting paid a large amount of money to do this, I think it's fair for those expectations to shift. And I think student athletes need to start becoming more comfortable with the idea that, hey, if this is the good with the bad of this, like now expectations are different. And again, doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but it does mean that you will be held more accountable for the mistakes that you make, because mistakes are more costly, quite literally, when you are getting paid big money. Again, I don't think that there's any fault here. I don't think Lanier needs to be like flamed or shamed for making a mistake in a basketball game. And I don't think Rick Barnes needs to be, criticized for making comments. These comments are relatively mild, to be honest. It's not even that. Mick Cronin had 6 worse comments than this last week. Like, this is not that big of a deal. But I think it's a notable thing that we're going to see more of as expectations for student athletes rise with the fact that they are making more money in this sport in the modern era. All right, moving on. I want to talk a bit about this slate of SEC games. We got 5 games taking place on Tuesday. We start Mississippi State, the 15th ranked Bulldogs, going on the road at Auburn, who is now number 1 in the country. I saw a post on social media paraphrasing Thanos from Infinity War. We got the number 1 ranking. What did it cost? Everything, because Johni Broome goes down with that injury. As of now, we do not know how long he will be out, other than to know that he will not play in this game, which is at 7 Eastern time on the SEC network. FanDuel does favor Auburn still by 9.5 points, but certainly you got to feel pretty good if you're Mississippi State going into this game, not only with Broome out, but it being pretty sudden, their first full game without him. You smell a little blood in the water, and you want to see if Chris Jans can go get an upset here. I'm still picking Auburn. They're so deep. They're more equipped to handle losing a player like Broome than most teams are, and I think that that'll ultimately play out, especially with them being at home. But man, it's a great opportunity for Mississippi State. Ole Miss, 21st ranked Rebels, going on the road to take on Bama. Another Mississippi versus Alabama matchup here in terms of the states. We got the 4th ranked Bama Crimson Tide hosting Ole Miss in this one, also at 7 Eastern time on ESPNU. Bama favored by 10.5. we'll see if Chris Beard and the defense can find a way to slow down this Alabama team. That's going to be the big storyline in this one. Obviously, Cliff Omori, making a big difference for this Bama team on the front court, but this should be a very fun game. Another ranked-on-ranked matchup, 3 of them in the SEC on Tuesday. A&M, number 11, ranked Aggies go into Rupp Arena to take on Mark Pope and the 8th-ranked Wildcats of Kentucky, 7 Eastern time as well. So 3 ranked-on-ranked matchups, all in the SEC, all starting at 7 Eastern time. Better hope you got that YouTube TV. This one on ESPN2, FanDuel favors Kentucky by 5.5. Really depends what version of A&M shows up. We've seen this team be lights out from beyond the arc. That's going to be really tough for Kentucky to slow down. But if they're missing their shots, Kentucky could win this one, and they could win this one big. 2 more games in the SEC. Mizzou on the road at Florida, the 5th-ranked Gators, 9 Eastern time on ESPNU. FanDuel favors Florida. That's hard to say 3 times fast, by 12.5 points. Like Florida in this one, Mizzou has shown their moments. Dennis Gates certainly off to a better start than they were last year when they didn't win a game in conference play. So a lot of talent on this Mizzou roster, but I don't think they're balanced enough, and they're not going to out-talent a Florida team that has Walter Clayton and Will Richard and Elijah Martin in that backcourt, and some really talented players in the front court as well. Then John Calipari in Arkansas going on the road at LSU, a very, very good LSU club, 9 Eastern time. This one on the SEC network. FanDuel favors the road team, the Hogs, by 1.5. I've seen Arkansas show some really promising signs at times this year, but we've also seen Zvonimir Ivisic is not making an impact on this team right now because the defense and the rebounding is just not there. Nelly Davis has really struggled this year, has had his moments, but by and large just has not been the player that John Calipari was really hoping to get. Everybody thought, oh, this is kind of the Antonio Reeves type addition for this team. He hasn't been that guy for Arkansas, and it's really, really hurting this team. Very interested to see how they look. Boogie Flan should have a big one here against this LSU team. He feels like a huge hinge in terms of whether the Hogs can pick up a needed win here. If not, certainly going to start to feel some angst, some stress for this Arkansas team at this point in the season. Moving on from the SEC to talk Big Ten basketball, Dusty May has Michigan sitting pretty at 5-0 in conference play, while Tom Izzo and the Spartans are in the same spot as once again. More on these 2 teams and tonight's Big Ten battles coming up in just a second. But first, folks, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. Recently, I used Game Time Picks to find tickets for my dad and I to check out Purdue at Oregon this Saturday. Browsing through the deals was a breeze, and I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. In fact, their super deal stood out as the best value for the event. That's what we ended up going with. I love that I could see the seat views before buying, and that the app shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, the one-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. Look, if you want to join me at that game this weekend, if you're in the Eugene area, Game Time has tickets in section 211. Folks, they're just $11 a piece. You can also get the super deal, different super deal, but still a very good deal. Section 108, row D, just a few feet off the floor, $73 a piece. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton here, still hanging out on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We're still getting ready for Tuesday's slate of games. We got 2 games in the Big Ten I want to talk about, 2 out of 3, with apologies to Iowa and USC. But before we get to those games, I want to talk about another thing that Isaac and I were unable to get to on Monday's episode of Locked On College Basketball, and that's the fact that the 2 Michigan schools are both 5-0 in Big Ten play. The Big Ten has kind of struggled to have any marquee teams. UCLA has not looked like that team lately. Oregon has had their stumbles. Purdue has had their stumbles as well. And yet, when the dust clears here in mid-January, 2 of the undefeated teams still standing are in East Lansing and Ann Arbor. We start with Michigan State. They beat Northwestern on Sunday on the road, 16th ranked team in the country. 9 straight wins for Michigan State, 5-0 in conference play, 14th at Ken Pom, top 25 adjusted offense, 25th to be specific, and then also defense at 12 for Tom Izzo's club. And look, the only losses for this team, they lost to Kansas on a neutral site earlier in the season. They lost to Memphis in Maui. That's it. This team has wins over North Carolina. They have a win over Ohio State, a win over Northwestern, win over Nebraska, win over Colorado, win over Washington, FAU. This is a team that has some quality wins. They still have to be a little bit more tested. There's still some of the better teams in the Big Ten that they have not played yet, but can't ask for a whole lot more from Tom Izzo's team, especially coming off of a not so great season last year. They got an opportunity to continue to ride the train here. They got Penn State next. That game is on Wednesday. Then they host Illinois, a team that's stumbling a little bit. Then they're on the road at Rutgers, definitely a winnable game despite Rutgers having two superstar freshmen in Harper and Bailey. And then they host Minnesota. That's a stretch where very reasonable to expect this team to be 4-0, at minimum 3-1 out of that stretch right there. This team is in a really good spot to finish right at the top, if not at the very top of the Big Ten. And they're doing it not just because of Jaden Akins, although he's having a great season, 14 points, a little under 4 rebounds, 1.5 assists, very efficient, 57% on 2-pointers. But what really struck me about this team is the balance. They're 2 through 10 in terms of points per game are all between 4.6 and 9.7. Basically, within a 5-point swing is number 2 through number 10 in the rotation for Tom Izzo's team. Any given night, any different player can beat you, whether it's Kohler, whether it's Richardson, whether it's Cohen Carr. Like, there is so much depth and variety in how this team can attack you. And no coach in the country who's better at mixing and matching and finding the right recipe than Coach Izzo. This team is going to be dangerous this year. They're going to be a team that nobody's going to want to face in March. That's true of every Tom Izzo team, but this specific brand of Michigan State basketball, this could be a team that's making some real noise in March and making us wonder if that Big Ten streak, if it's maybe going to come to an end. Looking over at the Wolverines, probably don't have quite that high of expectations, but man, has it been a great one-season turnaround for Dusty May, replacing Juwan Howard for this club. This team, they win 91-75 over Washington in Seattle on Sunday, go halfway across the country, pick up a comfortable 16-point road W. They're now also 5-0 in the Big Ten, 13-3 overall. KenPom actually likes them over Michigan State. They have them 10th compared to 14th for the Spartans. Adjusted offensive efficiencies, 13th. Defense is 18th, so top 20 in both measures. They lost very early in the season to Wake Forest. Not a great loss, as Wake Forest looks like they're really struggling at this point, but it's an understandable loss considering Wake Forest has a lot of the pieces back. Hunter Salas is back. Efton Reed is back. Hildreth is back. Meanwhile, Michigan was playing a very, very new roster in Dusty May's, I think, second game of his coaching career, maybe third game. Either way, that was a match that certainly favored Wake Forest at the time. Outside of that, their only other losses were back-to-back in early December against Arkansas and Oklahoma. Again, not great losses now that Oklahoma has struggled in conference play, but understandable losses against very good teams. All of those losses were on neutral floors as well. Meanwhile, for Michigan, they got really nice wins. They beat Wisconsin. They beat UCLA and Iowa. They also beat USC and UW in conference play, and then Xavier and TCU in the non-conference. Next up for them is at Minnesota. They got Northwestern at home. They're at Purdue. That's a tough one, but a really great opportunity to go pick up a win at Mackey. Then they're home against Penn State, and they're on the road at Rutgers. Team is led by the two-headed monster in the front court, Danny Wolf, averaging 12.5 points, 10.1 boards, and just under 4 assists per game. Incredibly efficient, 67% on 2-pointers, 34.5% from 3. Meanwhile, Vlad Golden leading the team with 15.4 points per game, also averaging about 6 boards and about 2 blocks per game, shooting 69%. Those two guys are a matchup nightmare for anybody going up against this Michigan team. Dusty May knows how to utilize them extremely well. We saw Namari Burnett have a fantastic game against UW. There's more to this team than just those two bigs, but it starts in the front court. It starts with them. And again, most teams in the country just do not have the size and the defensive ability to slow those two guys down. As long as Coach May continues to find ways to utilize them to get Wolf making that entry pass, this team's going to be really tough to stop. I wouldn't be surprised if these two Michigan clubs finish top 5 for sure in the Big Ten. I think it's reasonable to expect that they're 2 of the top 3 teams. Purdue's going to be in that mix. Oregon's going to stay in that mix. We'll see if some of those other teams can kind of climb in there. Illinois has been stumbling a bit lately. We'll see about Ohio State and some of the others, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if we're talking about Michigan and Michigan State as 2 of the 3 best teams in the Big Ten when this season is all said and done. 2 Big Ten games to talk about today. Again, apologies to Iowa and USC. We got the 19th ranked Illini going on the road at Indiana, 7 Eastern time on Peacock, FanDuel favors Illinois to win this one by 3.5. The big question, whether we have a return for Kasparis Jakusionis, who's missed the most recent games for the Illini. If he's healthy, that's a huge boost for this team. It was very clear that they desperately needed him over the weekend when they lost to USC. Again, as of this recording, we do not know the status for him in this game. Meanwhile, Malik Reneau, same situation for Indiana. He's been out for a while. The latest indication is that he's still making his way back. As I'm recording this right now, we do not know if he is going to play. Those are the two big question marks for this game. I think Illinois should win this one, even in Bloomington. But Indiana has had some surprise strong performances at times this year, and perhaps they could do it against an Illinois team that did not look good without Jakusionis last time out. And then we got Ohio State on the road at Wisconsin, who just snuck into the top 25. They're 24th. The Badgers, after a nice week. John Tanji continues to be great for them. This game is at 9 Eastern time on Peacock. FanDuel favoring the Badgers in that one by 5.5. We got a lot more games to get to today. We're going to talk about Baylor, who snuck back into the top 25. Can they pick up a big win on the road against Arizona? Plus, is this the day Pat Kelsey surpasses Kenny Payne's total wins at Louisville? We're going to discuss that and more coming up in just a second. But first, folks, after the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your house a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. So whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. I'm currently looking for furniture, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and my budget. My favorite part, the free and hassle-free delivery, even for larger items. Wayfair's site was so easy to navigate, and I found everything I needed in no time. I hate the end of Christmas because the house feels empty and with all the decorations gone, so thankfully Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. So give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right, folks, closing out the show with 10 more games on Tuesday. Like we said, it is a loaded slate. We talked about 5 in the Big East, a pair in the Big Ten. Now we're going to move on to the rest of the power conferences and 2 mid-major games to close things out. We start in the Big 12, 2 big-time games going on in that conference. Texas Tech on the road at Kansas State, 9 Eastern time on the CBS Sports Network. FanDuel favors the Red Raiders by 6.5 in that one. JT Toppin is back. He had a great game against Iowa State over the weekend, 18-9. Should be enough to lead them over to a win against a Kansas State team that is floundering, to say the very least, in Jerome Tang's third season. The big game, though, Jerome Tang's old club, Baylor, 25th ranked Bears on the road at Arizona, 11 Eastern time on ESPN. FanDuel giving Arizona, the home team, a 5.5-point advantage. If you told me that this game would be between only one ranked team, I would have probably called you crazy before the season. Both these teams are top 10 teams. We're expected to be top 10, top 15 teams throughout the season. If you told me that this would be a game with only one ranked team and they would be 25th, having just climbed back into the rankings, I definitely would not have believed you, but that is the status for both Scott Drew and the Baylor Bears and Tommy Lloyd in Arizona, really struggling this season. Really great bounce back opportunity for both teams. Baylor already had a nice week with a 20-point win over Cincinnati and an overtime win over Arizona State. We'll see if they can keep that momentum going by picking up a road win. If not, Arizona and Tommy Lloyd could get some much needed momentum as they continue into conference play. 4 Big East games to talk about. We'll rapid fire through these. We got the 7th ranked Marquette Golden Eagles at DePaul, 7 Eastern time on CBS Sports Network. FanDuel favors Marquette by 12.5, as they should be. DePaul still looking for that first conference win in the Chris Holtmann era. Villanova at Xavier, 6:30 Eastern time on FS1. FanDuel favors Xavier, the home team, by 2.5. Villanova had that great win over UConn, but then turned around and lost to St. John's, looking to pick up some momentum again in Kyle Neptune's third season. Could do so with a win over a Xavier team that has stumbled after a strong start to the year. Speaking of St. John's, they host Georgetown at 7:30 Eastern time on Peacock. FanDuel favors St. John's by 10.5. Johnny's 5-1 to start conference play, looking for another big win over Ed Cooley and the Hoyas. And then Providence at Creighton, another game that I don't think many would have expected to be between two unranked teams. That one's at 8:30 Eastern time on FS1. FanDuel favors the Creighton Blue Jays by 8.5. Not sure what Providence is going to do against Ryan Kalkbrenner. Feels like that's how this game is going to go for Greg McDermott's club. Two ACC games we want to talk about here. Miami at Duke, the third-ranked Blue Devils. That game at 9 Eastern time on ESPN. FanDuel giving Duke 24.5. That is the statement about where this Duke team is at right now, and perhaps more notably, where this Miami team is at right now, being 24.5-point underdogs. Yes, it's a road game for Miami, but wow, that is a shocking line for this team. Malik Brown out for Duke. Sounds like he's going to miss a couple of weeks. A big-time reserve player for the Blue Devils, mostly for his defense on the interior, only averaging 2.5 points per game, but has been an important player for John Shire and the Blue Devils. Regardless, obviously, FanDuel doesn't think the loss of Brown is going to make a big impact with the line that they're projecting. And frankly, with the way Miami's played, probably a justified call. Louisville going on the road at Syracuse. That game is at 7 Eastern time on the ACC network. FanDuel giving Louisville a 7.5-point advantage, even though they are the road team. Louisville already 12-5 on the year. The 12 wins ties the total number of wins that Kenny Payne had in his 2 full seasons as the head coach at Louisville. A great start for Pat Kelsey, also a testament to how disastrous the Kenny Payne era truly was for Louisville. This is a great opportunity for the Cardinals to pick up win number 13 this season, beat a Syracuse team that has really struggled this year, dating all the way back to the start of the season. Eddie Lampkin's a phenomenal player for Syracuse, and Louisville really lacks size, so that is one area to keep an eye on for Red Autry's team, but ultimately would not be surprised if Louisville ends up passing, or if Kelsey ends up passing Payne on Tuesday. Two quick mid-major games to talk about here before we get you out and on to the day. Colorado State at San Diego State, Mountain West action, 11 Eastern time on the CBS Sports Network. I think that's the third game from that network today, so might be a good one to just have on throughout the entire day. San Diego State favored by 8.5, but the Aztecs struggled getting into conference play. They only scored 48 points against New Mexico over the weekend. Meanwhile, Colorado State's kind of struggled throughout the year, but Nate Clifford, one of the better players in the conference, one of the better non-power conference players in all of college basketball. We've seen quite a few high-level talented players come through Colorado State in recent years, including Isaiah Stevens, who graduated after last year. Nate Clifford is fantastic and absolutely a potentially huge difference maker. But I do like San Diego State in this one, mostly because they are home at the Viejas Arena, and I think that's enough to give Brian Dutcher's club an advantage to win this one and get back in the right winning ways in conference play. And then going over to the A10 to close us out, St. Louis, Josh Schertz's club on the road at VCU, the Rams, 7 Eastern time on ESPN+. FanDuel favoring that VCU team by 8.5, but St. Louis hasn't quite led up to expectations. Robbie Avila being hurt for a huge chunk of the season was a huge kind of momentum stopper for this club after they hired Schertz and they brought in Avila, who followed him from Indiana State. So that momentum is kind of stalled out for this team, but certainly in an A10 where lots of different things have happened. We've already seen Dayton lose games we didn't think they'd lose. We've already seen some blowouts for teams that we weren't expecting. Certainly wouldn't want to pretend that there's no chance of St. Louis beating VCU. So this is a game to keep an eye on. Tons of great games on that 7 Eastern time slot. So wouldn't be surprised if you had a hard time finding a way to squeeze this one onto your screen, but definitely keep an eye on it if you can, because I think that's going to be some really fun, really high-level basketball taking place in one of the better basketball conferences in the country in the Atlantic 10. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Isaac and Leaf will be with you all on Wednesday morning to recap all of this fantastic action. I'll be back with you all on Thursday and Friday, and on Saturday I'll be joining Leaf for the game night episode on Saturday night after all of the games are over. After I go out to that Purdue-Oregon game, that should be a really fun one, so look out for that show in your feeds as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. And until tomorrow, peace.